A window into a creator. How much do you agree with the statement, a creator's work is a window into their mind, and that by watching how a creator works, what they do, what they give, you slowly begin to learn more about them. You learn about their hobbies, what they like, how they talk, and slowly you begin to connect with this person on a psychological level. You feel as though their creations were meant to find their way to you, that you were supposed to connect and bond with them, and that by playing with them, you have a friend. And that makes you feel good. That makes you feel great. When in reality, you have never met this person before in your entire life. When I talk about games that have changed my life forever, I think of The Beginner's Guide. A game that lasts for about an hour and a half, where you go into a collage of games made by a person named Coda, distributed by the narrator, Davey. The Beginner's Guide is a game about creating games, and has a lot of hidden subtexts that I don't think a single video could ever encompass. But today, it's a game that challenges the idea of perspectives and the meaning of meaning. We as an audience member always believe that everything we consume has a form of meaning or substance that was somehow intended by the author, whether that's true or not, and that through a person's work we're able to understand this person better. Well, The Beginner's Guide challenges that idea of how audiences create meaning. Disclaimer: this is all my personal speculation, as interesting as that sounds for a game that's about meaning, and nothing is indicative of the final product. And spoilers ahead for The Beginner's Guide, and if you have never played this game before, I heavily implore you to play it. It's an experience that will definitely be best played firsthand or with a friend. Trust me, you won't regret this. It begins with the publisher of the game, Davey, introducing us to the quote-unquote game, or rather, a series of games that was created by his good friend Coda. Davey introduces himself as the creator of the popular Steam game Stanley Parable, but for context, this isn't completely Davey talking about a real-life friend and publishing a real person named Coda's work. That would be borderline copyright infringement. Davey then begins to tell us that all of the games that we're about to witness is a compilation of Coda's test games from 2008 to 2011, and he begins to dissect Coda's creative process throughout the story, serving as our guide for how we sort of formulate this vague abstraction of Coda. Davey says that for some reason, Coda stopped making games by mid-2011, and that he was hoping that by showing people his work, it could get Coda to come back and feel encouraged. Davey mixes in anecdotes about his life with Coda alongside descriptors about him, and we get the idea that Coda is a very troubled person who has vast creative struggles that led him to loneliness. Endless random prison levels, islands where he talks to himself, perpetually cleaning simulators, a grueling staircase that takes forever to reach to the top, and so much more. Throughout the story, Davey attempts to learn more about Coda through Coda's work, and slowly we feel connected to a creator who feels pressured by the media and simply wishes to peacefully create. A creator that wants to feel the connection with others but didn't have the strength to pursue friendship. A person who felt like they were nothing but a machine. That Coda needed help. But that's not true. Because in the end, it was revealed to us that Davey has posted a compilation and Coda's game without the latter's permission. Davey constantly adds to these games small objectives and lampposts because Davey likes to feel the sense of accomplishment, not because Coda intended for this to be his design. Davey shares this with others because he vicariously exists through the praise that Coda's game receives, and that by others being happy with Coda's work, Davey feels like he's doing something good, that he's good. And it's revealed to us that Davey has been the one that's alone and scared and questioning his self-worth while parasitically using Coda's work as an anchor, and that he's been projecting his insecurities onto Coda's games and his character, and unconsciously convincing himself and the player that Coda was depressed. The game ends with a disgruntled message from Coda calling Davey out for his behavior, and Davey finally breaking down as he realized that he's the reason Coda didn't want to keep making games. This is just a lax summary of the beauty that is the beginner's guide's narrative, and I don't even think I did justice to it, so I really ask for you to play for it yourself because it's on a whole different level of emotions. But moving on. What I adore about this game is the multifaceted presentation it gives on the word interpretation, and even more so, its relationship with the word meaning. What gives something meaning? What makes that meaning true? And at what point did the meaning start off as an interpretation? And at what point was the interpretation more powerful than the intention of the author? Let's begin. The power of interpretation. The allocation of meaning to something abstract, unknown, and new, based on what we know and what we think we know about the source of the abstraction. Interpretation is a powerful tool. And that's how we make sense about everything around us. We as humans aren't particularly fond of situations where we know nothing about, either out of fear or embarrassment. So interpretations help us understand something through what little knowledge we have, even if those interpretations are dangerously inaccurate. And the beginner's guide shows us the importance of interpretation in art. We have no idea who the creator of the video games we play are, what their intentions are, or what kind of people they could be. We can only piece so much from the content that they create, but we will never truly have the full picture. But sometimes, we like to think that we do. The series of games presented in Coda's collection is told from Davy's perspective. And throughout the game, Davy attempts to interpret not just the games, but also Coda. Davy believed that by psychoanalyzing these games, he could somehow create a clear and distinct image of Coda's passions and personality. But that's not the case. A person's content is only a fraction of who they really are. And as audience members, we have to realize that whatever we're interpreting and how we come to those interpretations are already biased and flawed. Davy interprets these games with an air of subtle ignorance and arrogance, and almost confusion when his interpretation is challenged by the actual game. For example, when he couldn't exactly explain why Coda would want a game where you perpetually clean a house, Davy actually had to stop that game and add an ending. And when he felt like he couldn't interpret something, he just skimmed past through it and keep the player moving. One example is as the player was going through a labyrinth of a space station, Coda puts in a maze, but Davy couldn't make sense why bother with it. So he skips the labyrinth entirely and lets the player pass through. And if you've already removed a chunk of that experience for your own benefit, can you say that your interpretation is complete? Emotions and preconceived biases also play a role in how we form interpretations. It's also important to note that Davy interprets Coda's work with the lens of watching a struggling artist or a lost friend. This is important because as the games go on, the tone of the compilation becomes more somber and existentialist. Gone are the games of random labyrinths and scenes, and here comes heavy text questioning existence and social pressure. And of course, Davy's interpretations are much deeper as he begins to talk about Coda rather than the games themselves. Sometimes, art is simply meant to be appreciative of art, exercising beliefs and stories that you don't personally subscribe to but want to portray in the context of a narrative. Of course, this idea has limitations, but most of the time, artists just want to create a separate world of their own and see their ideas manifested on a canvas or on a piece of paper. But those ideas and those creations are not exactly indicative of who they are as people. You can have a hero story in a novel, but still be a vile human in real life, and vice versa. Unfortunately, Davy fails to understand this, and continues with the narrative that surely if the games are depressing, so is Coda. The second core message presented in the beginner's guide is the power of reinterpretation and the consequences posed when telling others what to feel about something as an appropriate truth. It all boils down to one question. How do we learn? Well, one example is through school. We sit down and we listen to a teacher, but that teacher isn't the core source of knowledge. She also just read it from a book. A book that's a collection of information from all sorts of people. This is because of the idea that meaning is collaborative. We trust this source because, number one, it's one of our only windows into that information in the first place, meaning we rarely have points of comparison. Number two is that that person is in an authority to tell us that kind of information. And number three, it coincides with our personal biases and perception. And because there is a belief that meaning is collaborative, surely all of the meaning that I place on one thing and believe is truly the meaning is the meaning shared by everyone else, right? No. So take that principle and multiply it to one extreme. Davy's position as the narrator shows us the importance of unreliability and hearing from a secondary source. And the game exemplifies this best in two ways. First is the unknown magnitude that Davy changes Coda's games. What we have right now is actually a repackaged version that, in the context of the game, has been manipulated and changed by Davy. And as we're playing this, we have no idea. Davy presents these changes like they're intentionally created by Coda, and it's that level of creative manipulation that could be dangerous. Because now, at some point, when everything has been revealed, we have to challenge Davy's narration by asking, how much of this was actually Coda's? And how much of this was Davy trying to fill in the blanks so that he feels complete? These are the lampposts. Davy calls them as endpoints throughout the levels that are significant because it gives a sense of accomplishment. Except he frames it like Coda did them. Davy talks about them in a third perspective like they were guiding lights into the darkness, and insinuates it like Coda was looking for a light in the end of the tunnel. But in reality, no. There was no light. And there was no end. The second way is just the way that Davy describes Coda to us as an audience member. Throughout the games, Davy gives us snippets and explanations about Coda's personality being reclusive, lost, and pressured. But in reality, we have never met Coda. Coda isn't our friend. Coda never made these games for us. Hell, he never made the game for Davy. But Davy constantly pushes this narrative and becomes the rickety bridge between Coda and the player. We are basically judging a person that has never even talked to us, and am now playing through something that shouldn't even be disseminated for public view. But Davy convinces us that it's okay, because we trust Davy. And because we trust Davy, surely everything that Davy is saying is true, right? Right? Davy speaks with certainty that he knows what he is doing. His interpretation is final, and that there's no other possible perspective. And it's kind of sad with how he actually talks about his supposed friend. While there's the usual I thinks, or in my opinion, he also goes for a much firmer tone. Coda is blank, or this is what Coda meant. And because the player has no other anchor to Coda besides the face value of these games being melancholic and sentimental, and Davy constantly pushing the story about Coda, then that's all we see Coda to be. Until the final parts of the game.
I just felt so strongly that if I could have connected with him, that if I could have somehow made his work my own, that I would finally be once and for all happy. It was that I needed to see myself in someone else. I needed to be someone other than me. But he stopped and left. And it felt somehow like I had failed.
The third message that I want to dissect is how much do we see ourselves in a piece of art? Every person has a varying level of self-worth, and what defines your self-worth is based on what you believe is important in life. And for Davy, it's the importance of connecting with Coda, that vicarious connection that may or may not even exist. Davy believes that by playing Coda's games, both he and the audience can look beyond the game and understand the machinations of Coda's mind, and somehow find meaning in the little games that Coda creates, understanding why Coda likes games that are perpetually cleaning, or just games in constant darkness, or something else that will make us know him more. Because Coda, to Davy, is almost a point of gratification, where if Coda does good, Davy feels good. So it becomes a parasitical mindset of leeching off Coda's stability, security, and creativity. And what's even worse is that Davy would bring his own interpretations when he presents the game to others. And in a way, Davy stops thinking of Coda as a human being. Instead, he treats him and talks about him like he's a machine that owes him something, just because Davy felt so connected to his work and so invested in Coda's ability to create. Davy unconsciously even projects his own insecurities into Coda by trying to establish a false sense of camaraderie by perceiving Coda as broken and depressed. Something that Davy realizes was what was wrong with him instead. The beginner's guide shows us that by attempting to understand something we don't know, we try to morph it into what little we actually know. And when we become so invested in this meaning to have cultivated, anything else is wrong and obsolete. And when it comes to understanding the complexity of people, our parasocial tendencies could blind our openness to actually knowing them, until we realize too late that we don't know them at all, and that we're merely consuming a fraction of their time, of their life.
Dear Davy, thank you for your interest in my games. I need to ask you not to speak to me anymore. I wonder at times whether you think I am making these games for you. You've so infected my personal space that it's possible I did begin to plant solutions in my work somewhere hidden between games. If there was an answer, a meaning, would it make you any happier? Would you stop taking my games and showing them to people against my wishes, giving them something that is not yours to give, violating the one boundary that keeps me safe? Would you stop changing my games? Stop adding lampposts to them? Would you simply let them be what they are? When I am around you, I feel physically ill. You desperately need something and I cannot give it to you. I literally do not have it. Struggling to come up with new ideas is not making me depressed. Low points are just part of the process. The fact that you think I am frustrated or broken says more about you than about me. I realize that this doesn't make sense to you just yet, which is fine. You're not my problem to solve. But I do hope that one day it clicks, and that you make peace with this thing you are wrestling. When you finally see what I am talking about, don't say anything.
As hypocritically meta as it is, I want to shift the perspective to Coda, the person that Davy constantly describes as depressed, as lonely, as having problems communicating with others, and everything negative. Rarely was Coda ever praised in this game besides his eccentric ability to create games. And as the game goes on, Davy attempts to psychoanalyze Coda by looking through the lens of his work. But the loss of authorship is emphasized again in how Coda's work gets altered and manipulated by Davy. Also that Davy can feel a sense of objective. And what's even worse is that Davy attempts to analyze these new adjustments as though Coda had intended for it, and frame it in a way that Coda actually subconsciously meant for other people to change it for him, like Coda is some kind of damsel in distress. But in reality, Coda never wanted any of this. These games were the one boundary that he believed kept him safe, and that Davy poisoned it by constantly showing his unfinished games to people. And even worse, being called depressed by his friend because he wasn't there to dispute those games. Despite Coda's heartfelt rant for him, Davy needed whatever it was that he thought made Coda complete. Davy needed that validation despite everything and published the games anyway without Coda's consent. And that's the clearest form of removing authorship entirely. The beginner's guide emphasizes the importance and the death of the author in how people consume art. How works are snipped together and dissected under the false pretense of objectivity. We, as critics and as audience members, like to think we have the full picture because we're looking at something a person created, that we can enter their mind somehow, that we are the paragons of neutrality because we have both sides and we have the information to work with. But in reality, we have no idea what this person wants. We have no idea what they want to do in the future. And what's strange is that as I write this script, as I try to narrate my thoughts about this game into something coherent, I can't help but feel disgusted with myself. that I'm practicing in the very act that Coda warned Davy about, going around and shoving my own interpretation of a game that I wasn't meant to play. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't know. On one hand, formulating your own interpretations in art means that you're participating in a higher level of learning, rather than regurgitating what's on the surface. But on the other hand, how much of it is real? And if your interpretation is wrong, is it possible that you've just created a whole new different art piece altogether? The Beginner's Guide challenges so many ideas of interpretation and what is the meaning of meaning. And it challenges the idea that we will never fully know something or the medium of which a person creates, or a lot of things, really. As I'm writing this video, I can't help but think that I'm also projecting my own biases onto Davy and Coda as characters. And while hopefully they're fictional, I do think this game is a magnificent lens into our own way of thinking and reasoning. As a content creator, especially as a video essayist, I always go back to this game and ponder and feel a bit more humble. That no matter how much I think that the facts are presented on the screen, that's not the complete picture. And I can never be sure even if I feel sure. So every time that I think I know something about someone or something else, I stop and realize that I don't know anything at all. My name is Aster, and thank you for chilling with me.